Good morning. I'm Ken. I'm here visiting with Mike. I'm looking forward to today. I think we're getting to the good stuff. Of course, it's all been good stuff so far. So, looking forward to process. Mike, we've talked about your background, we've talked about some common threads. Today, let's talk about how to get there.
Okay. Well, I thought today we would look at the beginning of the book of Nehemiah.
Excellent.
And before getting into it, I like to state again the need to be able to see. And the Bible we mentioned before, they say they see, but they don't see. They hear, but they don't hear because their heart is hardened. So the question then becomes, what does it take to see? You have to have principles, you have to have beliefs, that core things that you drive you. And the other thing also is that you've got to spend the time to look and analyze what you're confronted with. So before going into the first few verses of Nehemiah, I would encourage people to first read those passages and then try to say, okay, what struck me? What is it that I can learn before they hear my rambling and my perspective on what that is.
I imagine you would even suggest that people write some things down, some
Yes, take notes. Yeah,
questions that they have and observations that
right,
they've made.
exactly. Because like again in Proverbs, it says wisdom, you have to dig for it like silver. So in other words, it's hard work. Okay, so let's assume that you've read already those first few verses. What I like to do first is to talk about the background, the environment. What was the situation for Nehemiah? Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king. Before him, there was another guy called Ezra. And Ezra had been given permission to go in and rebuild the temple. And then in the book of Ezra, which is again in the Bible, in chapter 4, verses 7 to 23, it explains that, guess what? Stop rebuilding. We don't have the permission anymore. So the question then becomes why? Well, my favorite phrase is the Chihuahuas. It's little dogs that make a lot of noise. Well, the point is there were a lot of people that were threatened by the rebuilding of Jerusalem and were saying to the king, hey, guess what? Those are the same guys that you had to go in and defeat because they were rebelling against you. What are you doing? And he had, I guess, a second heart to that. So the point is that if you're like Nehemiah, that you are from the promised land, and you're the cupbearer, which is a major position in the staff of the king, and the king heard all those noises, it gives you a little bit of a challenge as to what can you say and what can't you say that will question your motivation, your loyalty. So it's not an ideal environment if you're an Israelite in the court. If the king already has said, okay, stop the work because can't trust you guys. So that's one of the first things, because being a cupbearer, you had to have unwavering loyalty. And anything that would distract from that would then trigger some bells and say, hey, what's going on here? So when we look at that, we see that every situation has a precedent. And you've got to be aware of it, and you've got to be not just accepting it, but understanding the dynamics behind it. Because guess what? That will affect the way you respond.
So in every organization, we can
Yes,
take the wisdom from Nehemiah and begin with the precedent and the background.
the background, exactly. I understand. Do your homework. And the point is you can't take forever. One of the things that we used to do in a consulting business when a person was taking a new position, a promotion or transfer or whatever, we would get them to be on a what we call the fast start. And the fast start, where the idea was don't blend into the scenery, go out and talk to the different stakeholders during the coming week and do your homework and figure out what needs to happen, what are the priority, what should be the criticism, what should be the whatever, so that you're ready to take a proactive position as you go into the new situation. So that's one of the things that we encourage people to do is don't take the attitude that, well, I'll take time and I won't step on any toes and I'll just go along with the flow and then we'll see what happens. That's not a scenario for success.
So the fast start lasted a week.
A week, sometime 2 weeks if it was a fairly heavy position of some sort. But the point is that in less than a month, that guy had to or that lady, whatever, that person, that candidate, had to have a plan of attack that they were ready to discuss with their leader. So let's move on then to Nehemiah. And let's read, we'll just concentrate first on the first verse. It says the words of Nehemiah, son of Akaliah, in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, I was in Susa, the capital. And I'd like to stop there. And the question then is, why would I stop there? What's significant about that? Okay, so he's there. Well, you've got to appreciate two things. One, if he's in a position of authority, he's in the castle. The castle had different courtyards. And the inner sanctum, where the king was, nobody was able to go in unless invited. And if they weren't invited, guess what? That was the end of that. Okay, they wouldn't take any chances. So if he's in the capital and he's a cupbearer, he's next to the king. So you have to understand that, like, for instance, if I go on Wall Street or if I go to Washington and I go to the White House, I just don't go and waltz in. There's security. So the next thing that it says, then after that, given that he is in the capital, he says that one of his brothers came with men from Judah. So if they came from Judah, where did he meet them? Surely it wasn't in the castle. So it means that Nehemiah had to move himself out of the inner sanctum and go in places where those people might congregate. So given the Old Testament and the practices then, it was probably at the gate of the city or in the market or a public place where you could interact with all kinds of other people. So that's probably the second lesson from a management point of view or from a people relationship point of view. You've got to move yourself out of your area of comfort and go and meet the people where they are. So for instance, with supervisors, one of the things that we would say is first thing in the morning, be at the gate and greet the people as they're coming in, okay? You have to meet them where they are, not in your office doing whatever it is that you do. There'll be plenty of time to get in the office. So the point is that when those guys came, Nehemiah had the practice, I suspect, of going out and mingling in with people to find out what's going on. For whatever reasons he was doing that, that's essentially what was required to be able to get those guys to meet. So the next thing after that, in the second verse, he says, I asked them about the Jews that survived and those who escaped the captivity. So he's pretty well aware of the history and the situation that had existed when he was taken in exile. And then they said, they replied, the survivors in the province who escaped captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken and the gates have been destroyed with fires. In other words, the place is a mess. So then you've got to go back and say, okay, you hear this, your cupbearer to the king, what do you do? Do you start making waves, or do you do like they do on the or what you watch on television? You have those cardboard things that says, free Jerusalem or whatever it is, you rebuild. You don't do anything like that. So how do you react? Because you know that if you're a cupbearer and there's a question about your loyalty, guess what? You're done for. Okay. So that's where you've got the tension for every manager, any new person, is you have the tension of the precedent and what needs to be done. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? And most people will go with the flow, but the ones in the 5 cases that I chose to look at, it's very clear that they weren't satisfied with the status quo. They were going to take it to heart. So you see that a little bit in the following verses, in verse 4, when it says, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So if they had been a psychiatrist, people might have said, well, you need to see a shrink. What's wrong with you? That's the way it is, roll with the punches kind of thing. But no, he took that to heart. And that's the challenge, is if you're going to have an impact, you really have to have deep-rooted convictions about what needs to happen. Okay? So you've got the tension between, do I save my job? Do I say anything that will threaten my position? Or do you say, well, like the 3 monkeys, I don't hear anything, I don't see anything, I don't say anything, okay? And you cannot have an impact. You cannot have a turnaround unless you confront what needs to be confronted. And the question then is, how do you do that? So the next thing after that, I won't go through all the others, the following verses, but the key thing with Nehemiah in the following verses is that the king sees his demeanor. And he says, what's bugging you? So my rendition of what the Bible says. And Nehemiah says, well, how am I supposed to be excited when I know that the place of my roots is a mess? And yet he says it in a way that it's not a threat to the king or a question to the king to say, whoa, what's going on here? But more the other king says, okay, you go and fix it. So it shows the level of integrity and the level of
Could we say trust?
Trust, yes, that he had established. And it wasn't a bias thing that says, well, we'll set up a power that will confront your power kind of thing, but more fixing something that ought to be fixed kind of thing. So when I go back to the 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 five cases that we will look at, the first part is how do you get started? Where do you go? And you have to have the courage, the fortitude to be able to address those things in a constructive way. It's not a matter of criticism. It's not a matter, you guys before me were terrible. This should have been done. That it's not a criticism. It's more a matter, okay, what are we going to do about it? Okay. So that's
Let
the
me
first.
interrupt, Mike. Excuse me. You keep referring to five cases. We've got a bibliography attached to the videos, don't we? People can
Yes,
look at what those are that you're referring to.
yes, yes,
They're effective leaders in various different kinds of organizations. Go
yeah,
ahead. Excuse me for
yeah.
interrupting you.
No, no, it's true. But like for instance, Bratton, Bratton rode in the police cars to get a feel for what's what kind of thing. He was an experienced manager already to start with, so he wasn't getting an education. He probably knew what he was going to see, but you have to be present and you have to have the hands-on knowledge to be able to make that happen. Uh, Another story that I didn't put on the references, but that I like is the guy that turned Nissan around. Nissan, car manufacturer in Japan, was in deep trouble and billions of dollars in trouble. And the French company Renault said, well, we'll put in $2 billion on the condition that our guy will come and run things. And the guy was Gosen. And there again, he did the same thing. He go and went and talked to different people. We'll review those a little bit later in detail. But the point is every one of those guys exhibit the same pattern of how do you get started. So it wasn't a setting up a meeting and say, okay, here this, ship up or else kind of thing, but more, we need to fix this, fix that. And every one of those had different solutions because their industry was different, their culture was different, everything was different. And yet you have that same phase in the turnaround that needs to happen.
That's the thing I'm excited about. This is not just for business. It's not just for consulting. It's not just for manufacturing. It's for people in any organization.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
could apply it to a church, you could apply it to a family. Um, now with the tablets or the cell phones, how is a cell phone taking over family relationships? And when I see people, especially when they're having a meal and suddenly here comes a phone, I say, well, what go on? You've got, that has to change. You can't continue that way.
We're almost out of time. I know we've just begun. We've begun to talk about some of the process. We'll continue that next time we
Yes.
visit. Is there anything you'd like to say to conclude this portion?
No, the key thing is that every situation existed before you come into the scene. That's number one. Number two is there'll be people that will be against you succeeding. Not everybody wants you to succeed. Okay. And it's probably even more so in industry because if you succeed, people think that, oh, that's taking away my opportunity kind of thing. So it's better if you fail than if you succeed. Um, so you have opposition, built-in opposition within the organization and outside of the organization. In the case of Nehemiah, the people were saying bad things about the people of Jerusalem, is that the surroundings kind of thing. If the town or that entity becomes too powerful, guess what? it diminishes our importance kind of thing. Therefore, we can't have that kind of thing. So those are the very kinds of very important aspects that colors everything else that follows. And it starts again with the leader and the willingness to be able to analyze, to see, to act, to take to heart, and to set things in motion, as we will see with Nehemiah.
Thank you. This is excellent. I'm looking forward to next visit. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.